one of our money changers, probably Shirley. Glad y'all are here to help out, and then Brenda's back there serving drinks, so appreciate y'all's work. Also, if you will, we're missing Bill and Lucy Dillon, who are dedicated servers here, and they've always helped back. And of course, Lucy is still recovering from injury, so y'all keep the Hildens in your prayers. Let me not forget Jenny Jones, who was a very talented individual who helps us out with the newsletter and also the graphics for the paper. So, thanks to Village, and I appreciate it very much. In terms of a couple announcements, we'll be having a retirement reception for our beloved Jeff Tomlinson next Tuesday, December 5th at 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. here in the library. Following this event, immediately afterwards, we're going to have a reception for our new director, Philip Lancaster. Philip. And then also there'll be no lunching with books in December. However, January 24th, mark your calendars. We'll start the new year with Mark Neves. He is the author of Mississippi Bear Hunter, Holt Collie guiding Teddy Roosevelt in a lifetime adventure. Holt Collier was a noted African-American bear hunter and sportsman. While leading a hunt for U.S. President Teddy Roosevelt in November of 1902, Collier unwittingly set the stage for the event that originated Roosevelt's nickname Teddy Bear. So that should be quite interesting. And now we'll move along to, and I'll introduce our speaker today. We're delighted to have Brooks Eason with us today. By the way, before I forget, he does have some of his books for sale. He said he'll take a check, cash, credit card, so I didn't mention gold coins, however you want to pay up. He's kind of legal tender. But by way of introduction, Brooks Eason started life with a different name. He was born in a home for unwed mothers in New Orleans to an 18-year-old heiress from Tulsa named Julie Francis. Before giving him up for adoption, she named him Scott. When he was 2 months old, the staff at the home chose Paul and Margaret Eason of Tupelo to be his parents. It was his lucky day. Brooks grew up in Tupelo, went to college at Ole Miss and law school at Duke, and has practiced law in Jackson for the past 40 years. He's mostly retired and now spends time writing books. The Scoutmaster is his fifth. Fortunate Son was his second, a memoir about his adoption, the wonderful life his parents gave him. Now he learned of his birth mother's identity when he was nearly 50 and nearly got rich, but not quite. Brooks has 3 children, 5 grandchildren, lives in Madison with his lovely wife, Carrie. Carrie's here. There's Carrie in the back. They have 3 rescue dogs, an orange tabby cat named the Count, and in their spare time, I love this, Brooks and Carrie host house concerts, walk the dogs, and dance in the kitchen. So, come on up. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. Great to be here. For you men out there dancing in the kitchen is good. It's a good wise policy, so you might want to consider. I was riding up here today and I thought it was a triple treat to be here because I get to come home to Tupelo. I get to see old friends. I get to talk about Daddy. And then across the road in front of us flew a bald eagle, and I said, well, that's a quadruple. I want to apologize at the very beginning. Carrie and I, and this is the reason she's sitting in the back by herself, Carrie and I have had the cough, funk, grunge for more than a week. We went to the doctor yesterday and got all kinds of drugs. So I may have a coughing fit, and if so, we'll all just have to suffer through it together. It was so bad yesterday. I thought maybe I should just pull the plug on this, and then I thought to myself, what would Daddy? You know, I should have asked myself that so many more times than I did in my 66 years. So I was last year speaking to this group 8 years ago about my first book, Travel with Bobby, about hiking trips with my best friend. And I've written 3 since then. My fortunate son, my other 2 since then. One is Travel with Bobby, not Travel with Bobby, I already said that. Bedtime with Buster, which is consists entirely of conversations between me and the late, great, wonderful Buster Eason, our dog. Great dog, fun book to write. And then after that, Redemption, which is a novel based on the life of my grandfather, Harry Brooks, who was a Methodist preacher here at the First Methodist Church in the Depression. And I discovered almost 5 years ago that he was also a convicted felon in the first half of his life and served time in the state prison in Pennsylvania. When I shared that discovery with Frances Williams, she was shocked because he baptized her. I told her she might want to get a second. So anyway, I've got all my books over here. Everybody wants one. Books make great books. But today I'm here to talk about this book, my most recent, The Scoutmaster, a biography of my father. You know, for many, many years, bragging on Daddy has been one of my favorite pastimes. Anybody who knows me well knows about Daddy and knows about all the Eagle Scouts and all the camp outs. It's something I've done for a long time. And nearly 2 years ago, I had a dream about Daddy, which is not unusual. And I woke up and I came to the kitchen and I've been debating what my next book would be. And I told Carrie, I said, well, I've got it. I'm going to write a book about Daddy. And she said, well, do you think people would really be interested in, you know, a book about a Scoutmaster in northeast Mississippi that nobody outside of the county, for the most part, knows anything about? And I said, well, maybe they will, maybe they won't, but I'm going to write it. And in writing it, it gave me an opportunity not only to brag about him, but to let a lot of other people brag about him. I interviewed 42 people for the book and learned a fair amount of things that I didn't know before. So I'll read some excerpts from the book, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers. I can't pull out my phone. Carrie's got my phone. So I was going to keep up with the time. So keep up with the time, Carrie, when I've been talking half an hour, stand up and yell at me.
I'd love to.
Yeah. She does that from time to time. So I'll read some excerpts and then we'll have some time for questions. But if a question occurs to you in the middle of things, feel free to shout it out. You know, you can't derail my train of thought when I don't really have a train of thought. This is my presentation here, which consists of the book and a bunch of posters. So you won't throw me off too much. So I decided for the first excerpt to read a short story about an event that occurred right outside this building a long time before this building existed. It occurred right outside the old library, which was here. And I know about the story only because Daddy's great niece, Elizabeth Leak, who was then a senior in high school, she's Myra and Bob's granddaughter, was assigned a task to interview a family member and write a story about it. And so her dad, Eason Leak, said, you ought to interview Bubba. That's what the family called Daddy. You ought to interview Bubba. And so they came up here one day and interviewed Bubba. And then that was in 2003. Daddy died in 2013. Not long after he died, Ellen and Eason, Elizabeth's parents, gave me her file from the project. And for years it just sat on the shelf somewhere. I didn't pay any attention to it. And then I pulled it out 5 years ago and saw that there were microcassettes in the file. I did not know that she had taped the interview with Daddy. And by then, microcassette players were dead. I had to find an old one to borrow. And then I spent a weekend, hit the play button and heard Daddy's voice for the first time in 5 years. I will encourage all of you, there are some people here who are of a certain age, do something like that. Man, it was special. So, I learned this from listening to the tapes. Daddy's first job after moving back to Tupelo was checking customers' credit for L.P. McCarty and Sons, a wholesale grocery founded by Buddy McCarty's great-grandfather. Daddy worked 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, and lived at home with his parents and sister Doris, who was still in high school. Daddy had gone to Ole Miss, graduated early, then served in the Navy during the war, came back here at the end of 1946. Daddy had sold or given away the old Model T Ford by then, had not yet bought a car to replace it, and walked to and from his job in downtown Tupelo. One evening when Daddy was on his way home, a car pulled over in front of the Lee County Library at the corner of Madison and Jefferson Streets, and the driver got out to speak. A.P. Bennett, who was both the principal of Tupelo High School and the Scoutmaster of Troop 12, said he was busy with school and needed help with the troop. He promised Daddy that the need was temporary. It would last for only a few months. When Daddy was interviewed by Elizabeth Lee more than half a century later, he told her of Bennett's assurance, laughed, and said, "But you know how that goes." Bennett's request changed Daddy's life forever. Despite his 60-hour work week, Daddy agreed to help because he always agreed to help. And his new role suited him to a T. He was young and energetic, and he loved the outdoors. Because he was only a decade or so older than the boys in the troop, they could relate to him, but because he served in the Navy during the war, they also looked up to him. Bennett soon decided that the troop was in good hands and bowed out, leaving Daddy in charge. He said he didn't give any thought at the time to how long he would keep the job. If he had, he could not have imagined he would keep it as long as he did. So now we'll go back. That's the library, since we're at the library. We'll go back to the beginning. A man whose talents and efforts are perfectly suited to his mission can accomplish great things. My father, Paul Eason, was such a man. Daddy worked hard to earn a living and provide for my mother, my sister, and me. But his mission in life had nothing to do with making money. His job was just a job. His mission, the calling to which he devoted thousands upon thousands of hours of his time, was to serve as the Scoutmaster of Boy Scout Troop 12 in Tupelo, Mississippi. Daddy became the Scoutmaster when he was only 25, still single, and just home from the Navy after World War II. He served in the role for more than 45 years, not stepping down until after he turned 70. Most men would have concluded that 45 years was enough, but not Daddy. He continued as an assistant scoutmaster for nearly 16 more, working and camping with the boys in the troop until he turned 86. For 6 decades, from 1947 to 2008, Daddy served as a beacon and role model for 3 generations of boys in Tupelo, giving generously of his time and talent, as few men do. More than 350 scouts attained the rank of Eagle during his tenure, and all of them learned lessons from him about honor, principle, leadership, and service. After he died, a friend declared that he was the best scoutmaster in the world. Leroy P. McCarty, Jr., known to one and all as Buddy, although I understand that his wife calls him Leroy. You can still get her to change, man. Was one of the boys who learned from Daddy and became an Eagle Scout of Troop 12. Buddy is nearly 80 years old. Now he is 80 years old. But he has not forgotten about his time as a scout and his love and admiration for his Scoutmaster. After learning that I was writing this book, he sent me a long message that included a story I'd never heard. This is Buddy's story. My My most powerful personal memory follows from the summer of 1957. The only requirement I lacked to earn my Eagle Scout badge was the 3/4 mile time run for personal fitness merit badge. I had not yet begun my high school growth spurt, was a bit chubby for distance running, and could not run the distance in the required time of 6 minutes. So, for weeks on end, on Monday through Friday during that summer of 1957, Paul picked me up after he got off from work, took me to the Robbinsfield track and training field. Weeks into the training, I wanted to quit, but Paul would not allow it. He was encouraging, he was tough, he was kind, he was patient. He knew exactly what he was doing. He consistently let me know that I could succeed. He never once raised his voice and was always positive. The result? That's my voice there. The result? After weeks of training, I completed the run in the required time with 30 seconds to spare. Really be something. The experience was a valuable lesson that has served me well throughout my life. I am forever grateful to Paul for teaching me much more than how to run. Thanks to Paul Eason, I am an Eagle Scout. Paul Eason is an authentic American hero. Wow, they didn't clap for me.
He is an authentic American hero. Of the best kind.
Thanks to the training he received, I'm going with gone, I got a car copy by here. Thanks to the training he received in the summer of 1957, Buddy McCarty became the 44th young man to attain the rank of Eagle in Troop 12 since its inception. Charles Johnson beat him. Buddy was the 24th under Daddy's leadership, which began a decade earlier. After completing the last remaining requirement with 30 seconds to spare, Buddy was awarded his Eagle badge on September 23rd, 1957, at Troop 12's weekly Monday night meeting. 65 years later, he sent me the story of how he conquered the 3/4 mile run and became an Eagle Scout. In July 1957, while Daddy was training Buddy at Robbinsfield in Tupelo, I was born at a home for unwed mothers in New Orleans. 2.5 months later, the staff at the home chose Paul and Margaret Eason to be my father and mother. When the call came, they dropped everything and drove south to get me. I was placed in Mama's arms on September 19th. Daddy drove us home to Tupelo the next day. 3 days later, when Buddy McCarty was awarded his Eagle badge, Daddy presided at the ceremony. Daddy is my hero. Many sons say that of their fathers, but many sons of other fathers, including Buddy McCarty, say that of mine. I rode on Daddy's shoulders as a child and stand on them as a man. Hundreds of other men stand alongside me. Daddy spent his entire life serving others. During his 6 decades of service to Troop 12, he helped raise thousands of boys, all but one of whom were sons of other men. All of us joined Troop 12 as boys of 10 or 11 and left it 4 or 5 years later. As young men, hundreds of us proudly wearing the Eagle badge on our uniforms. We came away from the experience with an enduring love for adventure and the outdoors, as well as leadership and life skills we had no idea we learned. We became better men because we were members of Troop 12 and because Paul Eason was our Scoutmaster. I think I've counted 5 Troop 12 Eagle Scouts that I know of here. Raise your hand, I may be missing somebody. Well, there's one I don't know. Who are you, sir?
I was raised here in Tupelo, Paul, Scoutmaster. I work with Eagle.
And what's your name?
Van Craig.
Well, thank you for coming.
Dr. Van Craig.
So, I realized just a few days ago that my appreciation for the remarkable value of Daddy's gift to this has come to me in 3 stages. The first, I would say, was when I was a child. And it didn't come to me much when I was a child. Troop 12 was just a part of our lives. Daddy became a Scoutmaster 10 years before I was born. He became a Scoutmaster before he married my mom. Richard Condrick, Charles Johnston's close friend, met with Mama before the wedding and said, "You've got to understand, we had him first." And she understood. So when I was a child, you know, Scouts was as much a part of our lives as going to the First Methodist Church on Sunday morning and having burgers and watching Gunsmoke on Saturday night. It was just the routine. Daddy went to Scout meetings every Monday night, camped with the boys once a month at least, and spent time during the week coordinating it all so that it worked like a charm. So it was not a big deal to me that, you know, Troop 12 was just part of life. So this is an excerpt from my life during that time. I had an idyllic childhood. I grew up in a wonderful place at a wonderful time, at least for me and my friends. Tupelo was full of good families, and helicopter parents were not yet a thing. My friends and I were free to roam and explore, catching all sorts of creatures in the creek beside our vacant lot during the day, and playing kick the can in the neighborhood at night. And I had the greatest gift a child can be given: wonderful, devoted parents. We didn't have much money, but when you've never taken a fancy trip or eaten a fancy meal, you don't miss either one. Mom and Daddy never had a garbage disposal. I guess they didn't miss that either. But though we were far from rich, we weren't poor, and I never wanted for anything that really mattered. And what Mom and Daddy gave me was far more valuable than anything money can buy. They were my parents, but they were my role models too. I learned the value of hard work and honoring commitments from them. I learned to treat people with respect. I never saw either of them do otherwise. They also gave Maggie and me unconditional love, discipline, and a sense of security. Children need stability, and we had it in spades in the house on Rogers Drive. From the time I outgrew my crib until I left for college, I slept in the same bed, in the same room, in the same house. There was little for me to worry about other than my next tennis match or whether girls would ever pay attention to me. And there was no drama. I never once heard Mom and Daddy raise their voices to each other. If they ever argued, they did it outside my presence. They were totally devoted to each other, to Maggie, and to me. And because Mama was devoted to Daddy, he was able to continue his devotion to Troop 12, meeting with the Scouts every Monday night and camping with them every month, even when Maggie and I were young. My earliest memory of Daddy is one of my favorite memories of all. He had just come home from camp out. He put down his gear, picked me up, spun me around, and tickled the back of my neck with his unshaven chin. I smelled the wonderful, mysterious smoke of the campfire he sat beside the night before. I knew the smell of the campfire long before I first saw it. So, and then I was a scout. People ask me if I was an Eagle Scout, and I say, duh. I was, you know, I was not all into advanced. I wasn't a gunner like David Brevard, let's say, but I at least had judgment enough to know that it would be a scandal if I did not become an Eagle. And so I did. So the second stage of my realization of how valuable Daddy was. When I say to this city, because think of all that the people who were his scouts had done for this city. There was one newspaper article that said that his Eagle Scouts were like the who's who of leaders in town. And now the grandsons are taking their place. So Daddy talked about stepping down after I became an Eagle Scout, which was in January of 1972. He had been the Scoutmaster for 25 years. He was 50 years old. Nobody would have regarded that as anything wrong. But for some reason, he decided to continue, and he continued for 36 years. He last camped with the troop, I believe, as best I can tell, in January of 2008, which was 2 months after his 86th birthday, and 36 years after he considered stepping down when I became an Eagle Scout. I'm 66 now, and I still camp, planning a trip right now. But I doubt I'll be camping when I'm 86. We'll see. So this is an excerpt from the time when I was an adult and had achieved the age of judgment and was paying attention. And I was married and practicing law and raising children, and Daddy was still going to camp, going to troop meetings every Monday night and camping every month. The first weekend of March 1993 was one of the most enjoyable and emotional times of my life. It must have been for Daddy too. The occasion was Troop 12's 500th consecutive monthly camp out. I'll pause here and say, I believe that this month, I don't know if they've camped yet this month. Well, I'm sure they have.
Yes.
29. Yeah, so this would be their 868th month in a row this November. I've got the 1000th camp out on my calendar. Charles's son Greg sent me a calendar appointment. So I've got a calendar appointment for November of 2034. I'll be 77, Troop 12 will camp for the 1000th month in a row. But back to the 500 camp out. When Kenny Kirk suggested in 1951 that the boys in the troop should go camping every month, Daddy could not have imagined that they would still be camping every month more than 40 years later, much less that he would still be camping with them. Betsy Ann and I drove up to North Mississippi on Friday with our 3 children. Betsy Ann being the first one. She dropped me off at Camp Document with the 2 oldest, Dan, Larry, and Cliff, who were 8 and 5. We would spend the next 2 nights camping with Daddy, the troop, and the scores of Troop 12 alums who returned for the weekend. Betsy Ann drove on to Tupelo with Paul, my youngest, who was not yet 3. They would spend the weekend with Mama, but returned to Yakima with her for the banquet on Saturday night. The gathering included more than 100 Troop 12 Eagle Scouts, some who had come from as far away as California. Those in attendance including men who had become Eagle Scouts in every decade from the 1930s, Daddy in 1939, to the 1990s. The newest Eagles were still in the troop. There were multiple father-son Eagles, and there were, and 4 sets of Eagle Scout brothers. Eugene James Hubert and Stuart Worth, George Dan and Kirk Purnell, who were Eagle Scouts because of their mother Camille, who wouldn't have stood anything else. Jim, Jeff, and Jay Williams, we have Mr. Williams here, and Lynn, Hamp, and Locke Bryan. It was a grand weekend, weather perfect. Daddy had a smile on his face the whole time. We had a bonfire Friday night and multiple activities Saturday, including canoeing, riflery, sailing, and the camp's outdoor course. The weekend was capped off with the banquet in the dining hall Saturday night. Jim Beam, a Tupelo restaurateur and Troop 12's 102nd Eagle Scout, fed more than 300 people who made the trip to Camp Yakima. Jack Reed Sr., a Troop 12 alum, and former Mississippi gubernatorial candidate, emceed the program with assistance from his son Jack Jr., the Troop's 67th Eagle Scout. After Mayor Jack Marshall Tupelo spoke, former scouts told stories and Assistant Scoutmaster Jim Hine presented a slideshow. Music was performed by Eagle Scouts Scott Reed, Jim Leake, and Jim Williams, who dubbed themselves the Moose Patrol. Daddy spoke briefly and as expected took no credit for the troop's success of the camp-out record. Assistant Scoutmaster Reed Hillen closed the evening by presenting an award to Mama as the Queen Mother of Troop 12. I wrote a letter after the camp-out to Daddy, and I asked him to show it to Mama. I started by saying he and I weren't much for bearing our souls to each other, which was true, but I could write some things I could never say. After thanking him for teaching me to love time in the woods and around the campfire, I turned to the camp-out. I looked forward to the weekend as much as anything I can remember. I have bragged on you to everyone within earshot. Lawyers and clients all over the country know about Paul Eason, the 500 camp-out, and all the Eagle Scouts. To say that I'm proud of you does not approach describing how I feel. The weekend itself was an extraordinary tribute to you. You should know that, but because of your humility, I expect you have thought of other reasons why former scouts came from across the country. But Dave Burnett and Stuart Worley didn't come from California just to see their brothers and relive all old times. They came to honor you. That's why we all came, to honor you. You will reject the label, but I will give it to you anyway. By any measure, you are a great man. You are my hero. I love you. So you can see by then I was starting to understand. But I still didn't understand fully. The third stage of my realization of Daddy's enormous contribution, the importance of that contribution, was writing this book. When I was in the troop, Daddy and I kept our distance from each other. I wanted to hang out with my buddies, and I'm sure he did not want everybody to be thinking, there's the Scoutmaster's son. I was just one of the punks off in the distance. And so, I didn't get a full view of what a remarkable job Daddy did as Scoutmaster. I mean, he was made to be a Scoutmaster. His patience, and he would require the boys to lead. He wouldn't do it all himself. It would have been far easier for him to do it himself. And I didn't really understand all that until I set out to write this book and interview many of Daddy's former scouts. As I said, I interviewed a total of 42 people, nearly all of them Troop 12 scouts, nearly all of those Troop 12 Eagle Scouts.
Butch, tell the story about your dad and either if it was one of the Burnett boys, when your dad.
Made him leave?
Yeah.
Okay. Clark Burnett. So Dave and Clark Burnett, sons of Cy Burnett, who
Sarah.
Sarah,
Rex Plaza.
owned and ran Rex Plaza. They were both Eagle Scouts, both been very successful, and they were both senior patrol leaders, which is the highest ranking position in the troop elected by the other boys. And Clark Burnett, I had this Zoom call with him and interviewed them together. Clark lives in Wimberley, Texas, and Dave lives outside Los Angeles. And Clark told a story about his very first meeting as senior patrol leader. And he and Daddy had walked into the scout hut, and all the boys came piling in, and they'd been playing out in the parking lot, and were as 13-year-old boys are. Loud, wild, not stopping, not sitting still. And Clark said he looked at Daddy and said, "What do I do?" Daddy said, "You're the leader now, take charge." And so Clark did, and he learned something that night that he still remembers nearly 60 years later, and that was the way Daddy did it. So I don't know, where am I on time, sweetie?
About 5 minutes.
Keep going.
I got 5 minutes to go.
Good. Keep going.
Are you in charge of this whole bill?
Well, he answered a sweetie. I mean, that's good.
Oh, you thought I was calling him sweet. Okay, so this is a brief excerpt. At the beginning, the whole second half of the book is the interviews that I did. Over the span of more than a year, in 2002 and 2023, I interviewed 42 men and women included men who served as assistant scoutmasters in Troop 12, the head scoutmasters after Daddy stepped down, his friends and neighbors, 2 of his nephews, 2 of his grandchildren, and men who became Eagle Scouts under his leadership in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. I talked to men who were lawyers and government officials, a Marine colonel and a Navy fighter pilot, a preacher and a math professor, an architect and a nuclear engineer, men who started and run successful businesses, and a woman, my daughter, who started and leads a successful school. A former scout who was a member of a FEMA team with trained search and rescue dogs, and another who trained stray dogs that raced in the Iditarod. At the time of the interviews, those I spoke to ranged in age from 32 to 88. They live all over the country from sea to shining sea. Yet despite the differences in age, occupation, and location, these men and women, have fundamental qualities in common. They are all good people who are devoted to their families. They are all responsible and successful. And without exception, they are grateful to Daddy for what he did for them and still means to them. So I'll read a few excerpts, as many as I have time, of what people told me. So the very first interview I did was with Charles Johnson, his close friend Richard Condry, and Charles and Joyce's son Greg. Richard was a Marine. He's the Marine colonel. He started, inspired by Daddy, he started a Boy Scout troop in Birmingham that has now produced more than 300 Eagle Scouts. So when you think about the ripple effect, it goes out. When I asked what Daddy meant to the 3 of them, Richard said, in all my years, including the 30 I spent in the Marines, my grandest experience was with Paul Eason in Troop 12. It was the finest time of my life. Charles felt the same way and was glad I was writing about Daddy. He said, the story of his life should be documented and shared far and wide. Richard said Daddy never acted like a drill sergeant or a commanding officer. He led the troop as a gentleman. Greg agreed and said Daddy was calm and always gave great advice. He trusted the boys to do what was right and to help everyone who needed it. Greg never wanted to disappoint him. He said his father was the most important man in his life, but mine was second. That prompted another amen from Richard, who said the 3 outstanding events in his 88 years were having Daddy as his scoutmaster in the 1940s, marrying his wife Jean in 1955, and coming to know Jesus Christ in 1981. When I pointed out that Daddy had him first and prepared him for Jean and Jesus, Richard said that. So this is from Leroy, also known as Buddy. Buddy said Daddy was perhaps the best teacher he ever had. He didn't realize until years later all he had learned from his years in Troop 12. One trait that stood out was Daddy's humility. Despite his exceptional talents and many honors and achievements, he never talked about himself. Buddy said Daddy was interested in you. He wanted to talk about you, not about him. At the end of our time together, Buddy told me Daddy was like a second father to him, and like a first one to the Scouts who came from broken homes. He then said something I wrote down verbatim. We were fortunate to have an American hero like Paul Eason to guide us during that all-important time when we were boys learning to be men. I would have done anything for him. So this from, I interviewed Dan Purnell and Scott Reed together, both close friends of mine from childhood. Dan's about 4 weeks older than I am, Scott's about a year younger than I am. They both run successful businesses here in Tupelo. I asked Dan and Scott if they follow any practices in running their companies that they learned from watching Daddy run the troop. Scott said he learned to determine the worst case scenario and take steps to make sure it doesn't happen. Scott Scott said he never asked, and by the way, since Scott manages our retirement fund, I hope he's still doing that. Dan said he never asked anyone in his company to do anything that the employee hasn't seen Dan do first. He told me people reveal themselves in what they do, and their actions speak louder than their words. Daddy's actions spoke loud and clear to Dan. By working alongside the boys, having high expectations but treating them fairly, always being patient, and always doing the right thing, Daddy showed the scouts and the troop how to lead. When their time came to lead, they knew how. Scott had recently taught a Sunday school class and talked about those who light the road and show the way. He said Daddy did exactly that, but because he was a humble man, he never viewed his work with Troop 12 as special. He thought of himself as an ordinary man, but Scott said he was wrong. Daddy was an extraordinary man and gave the young men in Troop 12 a priceless gift, not just of his time, but of his wisdom, his judgment, and his example. He had a profound impact on them. Robin Purnell, Dan's wife, was hearing much of this for the first time and declared that scouting was Daddy's ministry. Daddy would have rejected the characterization, but he would have been wrong about that too. His 60-year commitment to Troop 12 was an invaluable ministry to 3 generations of boys he mentored on the road to manhood. Where am I?
It's 12:43.
One more.
Okay. I'll read a little more, and then I'll take questions. I've seen Brad Tackett one time in my life. It was at a Halloween party in 2021 in Seagrove Beach, Florida, at the home he shares with his wife Rebecca and their daughters Taylor and Harper. Carrie and I didn't know the Tacketts, but were invited to the party because we were visiting the beach with Rebecca's mother and stepfather. I had no idea Brad had ever lived in Tupelo, much less that he was a member of Troop 12. After introducing ourselves to Brad and Rebecca, Carrie and I were on their patio talking to some other people we just met. Brad was in another group 10 feet away. Carrie overheard him say he was from Tupelo. She told him I was too, that Eason Boulevard was named for my family. Brad looked from her to me and his eyes widened. Paul Eason? He asked. I said he was my father. Brad abandoned his group and marched over, his hand extended. I'd shaken it when we arrived minutes earlier, but I shook it again. He spent the next 10 minutes telling me about his time in Troop 12 and how much Daddy meant to him. He shook my hand twice more while we talked. He said Daddy and I were legends. I corrected him. Daddy was the legend, not me. Jeff Pruitt is a Methodist preacher, former Scoutmaster, grandson of W.E. and Catherine Plunkett. Near the end of our talk, Jeff told me a story I'd never heard. Daddy never would have told me because it would have been bragging. When Jeff was at Emory in theological school, and he and his wife lived in North Georgia, they struggled financially. His annual salary for pastoring 2 small churches was only $15,000. In those hard times, Jeff told me he received an envelope in the mail from Daddy every month. Inside there was always a check for $100 and a note of encouragement. The money made all the difference in what Jeff and his family could afford to eat. He said he loves peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, but they sure taste better when you don't have to eat them. One day Jeff walked out to the mailbox to check the mail. His son, who was 3 or 4, tagged along. When Jeff opened the envelope from Daddy and saw the check and the note, he started to cry. His son asked what was wrong. Jeff told him nothing was wrong and why he was crying. His son said, "But don't you practice what you preach, Daddy?" You said the Lord would provide and take care of us. When his son asked who had sent the money, Jeff said, it's from Mr. Eason. He's my Scoutmaster. Okay, I'll read that log and we'll have time for a few questions. Decisions made early in life can have enormous and lasting consequences. A page is turned and there's no turning back. Daddy said he never used his accounting training in any job he ever held, but the degree qualified him for one he turned down. To become an FBI agent in the 1940s, an applicant was required to have a degree in either law or accounting. When I listened in the summer of 2018 to the recordings Elizabeth Lee made when she interviewed Daddy 15 years earlier, I learned for the first time that he applied for a job with the FBI before accepting the one at Mile Manufacturing. Some of y'all remember that. Why he chose Mile over the FBI, she didn't ask, and he didn't say. In the 5 years since I listened to the interview, I've often wondered how things would have turned out if Daddy had chosen a career in the FBI. How his life and mine and many others would have been different. The opportunity with the FBI came before he married Mom. If he had taken it, he probably would have been unable to stay in Tupelo. Had he and Mom already started dating? Would they still have married each other? Would they still have adopted Margie and me? A friend recommended that I give this book the title of my favorite Christmas movie, It's a Wonderful Life. The movie was released in 1946, the same year Daddy was discharged from the Navy and returned home to Tupelo. And I watched it at least a dozen times. Whenever I do, I think about the parallels between Daddy's life and the life of George Bailey, played magnificently by Jimmy Stewart. Daddy and George both had the talent and drive to succeed in big companies in big cities, but they instead spent their lives serving others in the small towns where they grew up. In the movie, Clarence the Guardian Angel gives George a remarkable gift, the ability to see what the world would have been like if he had never been born, and how the fictional town of Bedford Falls and the people who knew and loved him would have turned out. It's a brilliant way for Clarence to show George all the good he has done and what a wonderful life he has. Seeing how Bedford Falls was different without George makes me wonder how Tupelo would be different without Daddy. What if Daddy had joined the FBI and never come back home? What of the thousands of boys who became better men because of Daddy's leadership and example? How would they have turned out if he had not been their Scoutmaster? And what of all the others who loved Daddy and benefited from his service? What if they had never known him? The last scene of the movie, which I cry through every time, concludes with the arrival of George's younger brother, Harry, who was flown home to Bedford Falls in a blizzard. When Harry was 9 years old, George saved him from drowning. Harry is now a war hero, having saved all the American soldiers aboard a transport ship. As George now knows, all the soldiers on board would have gone down with the ship if he had never been born and Harry had drowned. Someone hands Harry a glass of wine, and he offers a toast to my big brother George, the richest man in town. I listened to the last of the 4 tapes of Daddy's interview with Elizabeth while lying in bed on Sunday night, July the 1st. After the tape ended, I told Carrie all the new things I'd learned about Daddy, things I should have known but never asked. Then something else occurred to me that I told her. Daddy, the richest man in the real town, died exactly 5 years earlier. 5 more years have now passed, but Daddy's legacy and influence live on. When I consider his extraordinary lifetime of achievement, that his tireless patience and commitment, the thousands of meetings and hundreds of campouts, and all the boys who became responsible young men under his leadership, I couldn't be any prouder. And when I look at my favorite picture of him, the one where he's dressed in his scout uniform, fast asleep in his recliner, an empty bowl of ice cream in his lap, I think of the first words from a verse in the book of Matthew. Well done, good and faithful servant. Anybody have any questions? Okay.
he's a lifetime scout leader, and he serves, you know, influences thousands of boys. And he serves until old age, finally catches up. It could have been written about your dad, so you should see.
Fred would have been a good choice to play Daddy.
Yeah.
Maybe he was playing Daddy. Somebody asked me this week who was gonna play Daddy in the movie, and I said, I think Henry Fonda would be good. You know, I've given copies of the book, this is, you know, the Facebook pages for everything, and I found this, Scoutmaster Facebook page, and I gave away some books and sold books to other people with Scoutmaster. You know, one thing that I think is, and you can learn about leadership and service from Daddy's life, obviously, but I think one thing that Scoutmasters can get from reading the book is just how important they are, just how important the work they are doing is. Because it gets, you know, I just think 60 years of bratty adolescent boys, wow, crazy, doing stupid stuff on every camp out, and Daddy did it.
Well, Brooks, behind every good man there is a woman, and I thought your mother was a terrific person also. I learned a lot from Margaret. Just wanted you to know that.
You know, that was another thing that I didn't appreciate until I was grown and had kids of my own. You know, Mama kept us while Daddy went to meetings and went to the house. You know, it doesn't occur to you that you're being an obnoxious brat when you're the obnoxious brat. When at the 500 camp out, when Reed Hillen crowned Mama as the Queen Mother of Troop 12, he, you know, thanked her for all those nights and weekends when she stayed home while Daddy was gone. And she said, I never said I stayed home.
What if you ask the mothers of Eagle Scouts to raise their hands? You've talked about the daddies.
Okay. Mothers of Eagle Scouts.
Brooks, I think one of the amazing things about Paul was the special trips he took them on, and I know Jay and Jeff went on the one to Washington, and they stopped at all the barracks, and they always, and I think the trip cost maybe, I can't remember, but it was some minimal amount, maybe $50, I'll say. And they, when they got back home, and they were gone a week, and this was the food, the transportation, and where they stayed, and they got money back. He gave them some-
You know, Daddy grew up in the Depression. And, man, he was cheap. Yeah, my daughter said he would never buy us a Happy Meal. He might just get us a burger because he knew that the toy would break. But he wanted to make things as cheap as possible, so that the boys whose families didn't have a lot of money wouldn't miss out. And there were also men in town, men and women in town who contributed to help defray costs, and so they did get to do a lot of things for nearly nothing. No hotel rooms, no fillets. Once they stay in, sometimes if they were gonna get somewhere late on the way, on a big trip, they would stay in the National Guard Armory. And Daddy had this relationship, and, somebody told me that, they were staying in an armory, and one of the boys climbed up into a tank and managed to get it started. Didn't go anywhere. That's what you're doing with it. Any more questions?
Brooks, I think your dad would be very proud of you.
You know,
he'd say, oh, shucks.
I think he'd be looking down and be kind of embarrassed, and he'd say, what's the big deal? But I think he'd be okay with it. I think he would. Okay, last call. Well, thank y'all for having me.